you everyone for attending. Today is the second webinar in our summer speaker series, which is meant to highlight different aspects of Represent Women in our research. And today we'll be focusing on ranked choice voting and the benefits of ranked choice voting for women's representation, and also ranked choice voting and the new report that we have coming out about ranked choice voting and women's representation. So if everyone who is speaking wants to introduce themselves, that would be great.
Awesome, so I'll start. My name is Courtney Lamendola. I am the research director with Represent Women. I've been working here for 2 years now, and I was one of the principal writers of the forthcoming ranked choice voting report, which I'm in the process of working the final stages for, along with the great research team that we have with us. And among them, we have Maura Riley, our research fellow, and I'll pass the baton to her to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Maura Riley. I'm the Represent Women Research Fellow, and I began interning for Represent Women last fall, so we're coming up on a year now, and then was promoted to a fellow in January. I have helped in whatever way I can with the ranked choice voting report, but that really is, or was, spearheaded and brought to the finish line by Courtney.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll just chime in quickly to say Cynthia, Terrell, and so great to be working with this terrific team of people, board members, interns, fellows, attendees, participants, experts. I see many experts from around the country, League of Women Voters, etc., who are all attending. So we really appreciate everybody's voice on this. But we're gonna let Anna introduce Michelle, I guess, or Michelle can introduce herself. And then we hope we'll have time for questions at the end after a good presentation of sort of the big picture from Michelle, and then some of the hard data from Courtney and Maura. Thank you very much for everybody for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Whittaker. I am a member of the Represent Women board, as well as an advocate for many years for ranked choice voting. I had the pleasure of working with Cynthia when I was on the team at Fair Vote, and we were helping to move reforms forward, and have continued that work. I live here in Maryland, and I'm continuing that work on a statewide level to introduce ranked choice voting for Montgomery County and other jurisdictions in Maryland. And there's a lot of work to be done, because we know, not only from the presidential elections, but when we look at local elections, that there's many times when voters are faced with multiple choices, great candidates running, and they're trying to make a decision about who's the most viable, who's going to get the most votes, and how to vote and make sure that they're voting, their vote will matter. And we should make sure that voters can do what we all really want to do, is just express our opinion, express our vote, express our preferences in the election. And when we use ranked choice voting in the cities that have used it, and that's a great reason why we should take a look at the report that Represent Women has been publishing, is that there's a lot of great data to show that ranked choice voting not only works to help communities lift their voices and so have a better representation, but also brings new voices into the discussion and really allows us to have elected leaders that represent our communities more broadly. And that's why I'm really excited to be part of this discussion. And as the past 2 or 3 years, I've been also working on campaigns, and it's been really exciting to talk to candidates and to work with candidates who are really committed to introducing and championing ranked choice voting in their context as well. And I think that we need to make sure that we're doing that on all levels, both like how we structurally make that happen, how we look at candidates who are equally important to that, and then how we build that grassroots support by engaging voters and residents in our community to make sure that they're aware of that. And that's why we have great activities that we're doing here in Maryland, and lots of other states are doing great social activities, even during COVID-19, to make sure that people know how ranked choice voting works, how they can get involved, and how they can make this happen for their communities. So I'll leave that at that, and then I'm happy to answer some questions or go into more detail on different parts. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us today. I think since we also have another board member on with us today, I'll give Mernaz an opportunity to introduce herself so that she can share a little bit about her experience with Represent Women and the bit that she knows about ranked choice voting also.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney, and thank you everybody for organizing these series of talks and discussions. I think that it's very timely and prepares us for the elections that are coming along. So I'm a member of the board and the chair of the board, the co-chair of the board for Represent Women. Been very supportive and active with Represent Women for several years. I believe it's crucial for us to come up with ways to both inform and educate our electorate on the best ways to have more women represented in office, both in terms of equity and representation that is necessary to have representation of our society in our electoral office, but also in terms of being able to come up with solutions that meet the demands of our time more by having people coming up with new solutions. And I think having women in positions of decision making in office is crucial. Maybe later on I'll come in with some other discussion points and ideas, but thank you so much for these series, and I hope we can continue them on and be participating in them actively. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mernaz, for also joining us. And I'll pass the baton back to Anna if you want to guide us through the next stage of this talk.
Yeah, so I was thinking that we could go over some of our report findings from the ranked choice voting report that's coming out, and specifically highlighting why ranked choice voting helps women get elected into office.
So to that point, I think a great place to start would be really with the basics, and that would be the what is of ranked choice voting. And I think for that, between Moore and I, we could start with the presentation that we had prepared and maybe walk everybody through the basics of ranked choice voting and then how it can be used in both a single and multi-winner election. So Moore, if you want to pick up from there, and then I'll pitch in with a little bit more of the detail about the data as we enter that part of the discussion.
Absolutely. So ranked choice voting can be used in both single member and multi-member districts. When it's used in multi-member districts, it is more commonly known abroad as single transferable voting, but both ways actually has a profound impact on the representation of women and people of color, as well as candidates from minority parties. In the case of a single member district, voters will rank their candidates in order of preference, and that depends on the number of candidates who are on the ballot, as well as local jurisdictions sometimes have a restriction of how many candidates you can rank, and other times it's just as many candidates as there are, you can rank them. The winner is decided if a candidate receives 50% plus one, so that's at least 51% of the vote in the first choice round. If no candidate has received 51% of the first choice votes, then it goes into an instant runoff where the candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated, and those who rank that person first have their second choice votes redistributed. And that continues until a candidate has reached 51% or more of the vote. In a multi-member district, that continues on until all of the members have been decided, if that makes sense.
Awesome, thank you. And in the United States today, the use of ranked choice voting, particularly its single winner form, is rapidly spreading, whether it's the hotbed of ranked choice voting use in the California Bay Area, where 4 cities, Berkeley, Oakland, San Leandro and San Francisco have been using ranked choice voting since the early 2000s, or increasingly as new cities, in other parts of the country, including Utah and New Mexico, have started to implement ranked choice voting for their own use to elect mayors and city council members. So in our report, which we'll be sharing with everybody shortly, we looked at ranked choice elections in 156 ranked choice elections for 227 seats total contested between 2010 and 2019. And one of the exciting findings that we came across was that of these seats contested, 48% of the seats went to women, and that today in 2020, half of the mayors, so of 13 mayors, a little bit under half, but of 13 mayors that have been currently elected by ranked choice voting, 46%, so 6 mayors, are now women, and in the city councils, just shy of half, so 49% of all city council members are now women. So these are just some really exciting kind of initial findings and initial kind of flashpoints that we are drawn to as we want to look into why ranked choice voting is helping women and kind of how these positive outcomes are coming about. I think I'd like to pass the baton over to Michelle if you wanted to kind of share what your perspective has been from working on ranked choice campaigns from the ground, what the experience has been for women candidates, both before and after ranked choice voting was implemented.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start off to say, like, my working in Maryland, with the limitation of Tacoma Park, Maryland is the only current city in Maryland that uses ranked choice voting. But we do have lots of great information about how we've experimented with ranked choice voting in our kind of social settings and the different activities that we've done. So we've through FairVote and other organizations, there are different apps that are available that help people kind of see and interact with what a ranked ballot looks like, which is one of the most important pieces, I think, to first introducing folks to what ranked choice voting is and how this impacts their elections. The description of it, works really well, but what we want people to know and get the most familiar with, and this, I hope everybody can take this back when they're sharing it with their groups or their communities, is how easy it is to use it and how similar it is to what you have right now with a ballot. So it's not like you're changing the ballot dramatically to vote in an election. There are different ways that it's done so that you can actually indicate your ranked choices, but it doesn't it's easy and it's intuitive for people to use the ballot. And that's one of the most important things to share with people and get people familiar with using it so that you don't have that anxiety that happens around changing our systems, which is one of the questions that comes up often is like, how does this impact our elections? What happens are people going to understand the change? And along with showing them how familiar the ballot is and easy to use, I also talk about the fact that we have in our elections right now, if you think about your ballot, if you've had a recent primary or you're thinking about the general election, there are usually 2 or 3 different ways that you're voting on your ballot that you'll see. You'll vote for one candidate for mayor, governor, whatever you have. You may vote for up to 3 candidates for school board member or for your delegates or state house representatives, which we do here in Maryland. And then you may have some yes or no answers for other ballot initiatives. So we have those 3 examples are primary examples of how you see your ballot. And we have thousands, millions of voters who are voting and doing each one of those activities, and it's not something where they're tripping up using it. And then we have great data as well from FairVote and from RepresentWomen that shows that there's little change in the error rate from people voting in a ranked choice voting election versus our current election systems. And so I point that out just to say that, there's a lot of people who sometimes fear change. And that's where we start off this conversation, is around we can maintain the systems that we have, but what that does is that perpetuates the issues that we're seeing, whether we're talking about disparities in who's being represented at the local level or at the national level, or when we're talking about issues that are impacting our communities, whether it's clean water issues, women's rights, education. if we're not able to elect leaders who represent our community and who are going to advance those issues, and the voting systems are part of the issue that's creating those barriers to having the representation we need, then we need to make the changes that are necessary to really see the full democracy that we want. And so I talk about that because we can easily say like this change is fearful, or I'm worried about this change, but really the status quo keeps us in this position where we are not moving forward on the issues that we want. And I know that there's so many people on this call, and there's tons of folks that I talk to who want to see real change happen. And we shouldn't have any barriers to that. Our election system shouldn't be a barrier. We shouldn't have barriers around people getting the ballots. We shouldn't have barriers around people being able to register and vote in their elections. And we shouldn't have this barrier around people actually being able to fully express their voice and express the opinions on the candidates that they want to see in office. And so that's why I start the conversation off there, and we have ballot examples. And I think we just shared one of the widgets, the RCV app. That's a great app to use now to test it out. We do it with examples, and Maine is I think we have some folks from Maine. They championed and I think did the best early examples of beer socials and beer tastings, where then they were ranking those choices. You can do it with non-alcoholic options as well. We've done that here in Maryland. We've done it with ice cream. Last year we had an event, we had lollipops, and we were having people rank their favorite lollipop flavor. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this that both introduce it in a friendly way, but help them see how this translates into what we do in our elections. And I think that's the most critical piece, because then when you add in the data about how this improves women's representation, how this has improved racial and demographic representation, that is it's showing when we make these systemic changes to our system, it's really bringing together what we truly want to see come out of our democracy. So that's kind of one of the basic tools, is just really making sure you're introducing it in fun ways that help people reduce some of those questions that they may have, but also introduce it in a way where they see this is a great system, and why aren't we using it already? It's kind of one of those questions that often comes up after we do one of our social events and we're able to use the app. So these are great tools, and I believe all the tools are free for you to use. They're just sign up and you can use the tool and start ranking your own option. I did it with my family just to let you know. We ranked what was going to be our favorite comfort food for the quarantine, and that was kind of funny to see what came out of our family doing a ranked ballot. But that's the great thing about it, is it's this great way to introduce it in very social environments, and that's the key. And then the next piece is really when you're talking about the how you get there in different jurisdictions, and especially we know that there's different ways that you can adopt ranked choice voting. You really need to understand the landscape, and there's a whole discussion that we can have on that piece, but understanding that your path to implementing and adopting ranked choice voting is really important, and making sure that you're making key connections with individuals that can help introduce legislation, but also making those on the ground grassroots connections with folks that you want to see help you, bring together new folks into that conversation. And we've been doing a lot of that work here in Maryland. And I want to just give a quick shout out to our friends in Baltimore who are really excited about ranked choice voting and have been doing a lot of work with this. A lot of our coalition partners, which include the League of Women Voters and other fantastic groups. It's folks coming together really around the needs and really bringing different folks into that conversation. And that, again, is an example of how we build a grassroots movement and build what we want to see as our democracy. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing that. And that's really a very helpful way to kind of help break down what are some of the practical uses of ranked choice voting and how to kind of get comfortable with using ranked choice voting if this is new to you and this is the first time that you are hearing about what the ins and outs of the system do look like. And I think one of the exciting things about looking at and working with ranked choice voting data and outcomes right now is, since this is a growing movement, since there are so many great things that are happening in all parts of the country, where people who are dedicated to kind of see how systemic change can happen and how it can happen in our lifetimes and what the impact of that really could start to, you know, shape what representation means for us. I think it's just a great time to kind of jump in on this conversation and think through how to kind of start having these conversations with our friends and our neighbors and our own families. And I think that the What Your Favorite Food During Quarantine is a great and friendly way to kind of start with that. So that's awesome. Let's see, Marinaz, did you want to hop in or? Oops.
Yeah, I just put a note out there because it's one of the things that I've noticed from the people who have become introduced to ranked choice voting and actually used it, excuse me, especially in Maine, some of our friends who've reflected on that, is that, you know, one issue people who are very concerned about democracy is, first of all, making sure that their vote, their concerns are being reflected. But also, once they have seen their own choices reflected, people want to feel comfortable that this is not basically suffocating other choices and other people. And for people who are really concerned about voice and accountability, it is just as important to make sure that you hear your own voice, you see it out there, but that also in the process, you're moving everybody else and providing them also an opportunity to be part of this process. And through ranked choice voting, you can have that comfort that my vote is not, you know, covering or suffocating anybody else's votes. And I think this is, in many ways, it's an evolved process of democratic involvement in any of the decision-making processes that we have. So I think it moves beyond individual concerns, and it actually helps community concerns to be reflected. And even if my choice is not what wins, I would feel much more comfortable knowing that a lot of other people are behind it, and it hasn't been a one-on-one fight against each other. So I think it is, as people who are concerned about our democratic process, this is something that we should support, especially even if our choices are not the ones that come out, because we can be assured that it would represent the majority of the voices in any decision-making process.
Thanks, Marinaz. I'll just jump in for a second to echo that and say I think the points all of you have raised are really important. And there's not only the great data around increased civility and less polarized election and campaign process, and in a lot of instances, higher rates of turnout and participation, more issue focus for campaigns, and of course, no split votes. We see the split vote thing happening anytime there are more than two candidates running for a single position. So that's a huge move forward. But I think it also does then imbue the winner of that majority with a strong foundation from which to lead a city, whether it's London Breed in San Francisco or Libby Schaaf in Oakland or mayor after mayor. If you're a newcomer to politics, newcomer meaning a woman or a person of color or maybe a younger person, it's awfully important to have the backing of a majority, to have the credibility and the agency to lead your city or your state, and I would say even your country forward. And so I think one of the things that's so interesting and is the fun interwovenness of ranked choice voting, that it really does address a number of different concerns that a number of different kinds of voters may have, and the data really sings. It really speaks for itself. That it is, we can measure turnout, and we can measure civility, and we can certainly measure the election of women and people of color, and for all those reasons, I think it it's clearly a reform that has the potential to really accelerate the progress toward a more representative democracy in a way that other reforms get us closer, but they don't get us as far. And I wondered, Michelle, if you could, and maybe I was distracted and you mentioned, you already talked a little about your role in your sister Brandy's campaign, and the limitations of public financing, for example, don't quite get to all of the things, if not everybody can qualify for it. And I'm a fan of public financing for sure, don't get me wrong, but there's something about adding this element of empowering voters to help decide the outcome of an election, which nothing besides ranked choice voting really gets at that. So I don't know I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about public financing and the benefits of it, but also the limitations without a ranked choice voting system in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will say, like, on public financing, it's a great tool for bringing new folks into the system so that we're not just reliant on going to wealthy donors to create our campaign coffers. And I think that's, you know, a key piece for many people who want to run a campaign that's focused on very specific issues or communities. You know, if you're working with some lower income communities or groups, you know, going to high-end donors may not be where, you know, they're going to have the same focus or values that you want to share. And so those are some things where, you know, public financing allows you to really just say, like, if you have a limit on the amount that you can receive, $50 in DC, $150 in the Montgomery County program, it then opens up that door to say, like, okay, I'm bringing up a groundswell of donors who you know, don't have to, you know, contribute thousands of dollars to have a voice, and it brings all these new folks who really are interested. And it is a great tool for bringing in new candidates. And when I worked with my sister's campaign, Brandy Brooks, who ran for at-large county council in Montgomery County, and when I just finished up my last race in DC for Ward 4 council seat with Janice Lewis George, who ran under the public financing system in DC. In both cases, what we saw was that public financing was this great help to level off some of those funding issues that we had, and you can really build a really strong start to your funding through public financing. But what we also saw, which is a great thing, is that it may introduce new candidates to additional candidates in the race, which you want. You want more people to be part of the democracy and sharing their voice and their opinion. In Montgomery County, we had 33 candidates vying for the at-large seats. There were 4 at-large seats available in that particular race. And what we saw was that with so many candidates, it was really challenging for some voters to know, like, who to vote for, how to vote in this election, you know, and when we looked at public financing data, while there was a lot of great data about how more candidates were using it, in terms of women candidates in the race, there were only a handful of women candidates that actually were able to qualify, including Brandy. And that was kind of an interesting imbalance in terms of just like trying to lift up these voices. And in the end, while Brandy did really well in the race, she finished just outside of winning the election, and they elected 4 men. They're great. I've been working with them on other issues, but it's something where you look at it, where there was a lot of discussions during the election about voters saying that they wanted to elect women. And then with the number of women that were running in the race, it was clear that most of the votes were split in the middle for around the women candidates. Brandy and one other female candidate finished in the top 7, but that was really kind of a struggle to get enough votes to actually win in that race. And it was a clear case for many people who were also talking about it, and where we needed ranked choice voting. And that's an example of a multi-winner race where you could use ranked choice voting in a multi-winner race to fill those seats. But we've also seen that, as I mentioned with the race that I did in Washington, DC for the DC Council, that was a similar case. And it was interesting that there were these discussions that were happening prior to the start of the race around how many candidates would run, and if it would split the vote and allow the incumbent to still to remain in the seat. And so there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we need to like discourage other voters or other candidates from running in the race. And I name that just because that is something that happens. I've heard about that in California and other places where, you know, if there's a coalition that's trying to make sure that a certain candidate or new candidate, or you're able to unseat somebody, they're like, okay, well, we have to discourage everybody else from running in the race. And part of me, you know, when I think about that, I'm just like, that just doesn't feel right. Like we shouldn't have a system where we're discouraging people who have a voice, and we're making the determination of who voters should vote for even before they've had an opportunity to evaluate the candidates. And so that's, again, another reason why when you have ranked choice voting, you don't have to worry about how many candidates are running, because you can rank your choices. The candidates go out, make their cases to the voters, and you have this new dynamic, as we've talked about, the increased civility, where people are actually talking about how they align and are similar to other candidates, and where their differences, but also where they have similarities, and asking for to be their second choice if they're not their first choice on their ballot. And I think that's a really new dynamic that we've seen that work really well in Maine. We've seen it in California races as well, where it's a really nice way to approach things. And even when you do have a lot of candidates, and the Minneapolis mayoral election a few years ago, where they did have 33 candidates running for mayor there, you even still saw that that voters were able to make a choice. And even with that many candidates, they heard from different candidates. They were able to, you know, rank their candidates. And it was something where I think they came out with it was close to 80 or 90% of voters, you know, ranking at least 2 candidates in the race, and really, you know, expressing their opinion. And I think that's just showing how effective these systems are at really allowing for candidates to run and allowing for voters to do what they do best, which is express their opinion and elect the people that most bring about that broadest base and really represent the community well. And so that's been kind of the exciting thing to hear candidates talk about it, and why I'm really, like, I'm continuing to champion public financing, because I believe that we need to get big money out of politics. But I believe that if you're going to introduce public financing, then you need to be introducing ranked choice voting, voting systems, so that we can improve our elections on both ends, not just with the money, but how we're actually voting in the elections. And I'm hoping that we'll see more of those reforms come through. As we see more people embrace and use ranked choice voting or use public financing more, I think they'll see these combination of reforms go really well together if we're looking at new ways to bring about a democracy that's truly reflective. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think now we're going to pivot to a question and answer, and panelists and attendees can see the questions as long as you make sure to click in the chat box a chat to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see that question. So if people have questions, they can go ahead and type that question in the chat box now.
As people are formulating their questions, I think someone from Maine posted earlier about questions in terms of some Republicans, if they haven't been happy with ranked choice voting in Maine. I want to point out one thing is that, you know, as I think Pan mentioned, that, you know, the Republicans in Maine are using ranked choice voting, and even if they're voting just for one, they are expressing their vote. Like the ballots say, you know, rank your candidates as many as you want. We're not forcing people to rank candidates that they don't want to vote for. So it's always the voter's choice in terms of how many people they rank on a ballot. And secondly, we have Republicans who are actively using the system. When we look at Utah Republicans, they've been advancing ranked choice voting in the state, and have been really strong champions, because they recognize how that helps them, that helps their base, their voters, and their party. And ranked choice voting is not a partisan reform. It's really open, and it's available to anyone to use, and we've seen it used in many different contexts. And I just want to raise that, just because, you know, I think it's easy sometimes to look at issues and see, is this a, you know, in a, you know, just for a partisan advantage in one way or the other. And truly, ranked choice voting is about voters. It's not about one party or the other. And that's what really excites me, and is something that makes it useful for folks in Massachusetts or other states where they have open in primaries and they're, different candidates who are running, you're not looking at, just voting for, it's not just related to your party using it, it's related to us as voters using it collectively, so.
I believe there was also a recent Republican primary in Virginia which used ranked choice voting and was actually a woman who won the primary, which is always amazing to see more women winning in both parties.
Yes, and that's a particularly good one, Maura, because she definitely in the first round of tallies was behind, and in the second round of tallies was behind. But enough people, to Marinaz's earlier point, ranked her second, third, and fourth, and so on, so that she became the person the majority supported, which is exactly the process that we value in a democracy. And now, as I said before, she really has a majority and can go on to take on the Democrat in the general election in November. So that is exciting to see that kind of a development. I wanted to make sure that some of the great state leaders that we have on the call, if you'd like to say a word about an update from your state or raise a question, I welcome Cindy Black or Andy Anderson or Kathy from the League of Women Voters in DC, or Pam from Maine. If there's anybody who wants to, I'm not sure how you can indicate that to me. I'm happy to allow you to talk if you would like to. Maybe I'll just make that because you might have had great experiences in the field to share with the group. But don't feel like you have to.
Maybe in the meantime, before they come in, there's a question here from Kingston, Jamaica. Actually, some question about some recommendation about how we can advocate for women's political participation. I think this has been the essence of the work of Represent Women, both in terms of passing out information and data to start off the conversation about how important it is to have women in political process and in office, but also is that the idea that not only is it necessary to encourage them, but also to help them and remove the obstacles that are kind of inherent in the system that stops them from being successful. So maybe that could be a good part, recommendation if others can come in. From my perspective, it is very important to kind of accompany them all through, not just suggesting that it's good for them to run, but also support them in every stage of the election process, and especially when they get faced with a lot of inherent systemic and regulatory obstacles that they have. Anybody else? Cynthia, Michelle, would you like to suggest some recommendations?
Yeah, I would say to check out our website and just be in touch with us via email, and we may be able to provide some specific resources that could be useful in Jamaica. So happy to continue that conversation offline and via email, and we can follow up with some resources as well. Why don't we turn now to Cindy Black, who can share a few words, and Pam and Kathy also have a few words to share. And we have about 25 more minutes left, I think.
Yes, hi, this is Cindy Black. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for letting me speak. So I'm here in Washington State. I'm the executive director of Fixed Democracy First, but we work very closely with Fair Vote Washington, and we've been actively working on efforts here through state legislation, as well as interacting with auditors and election officials. And also too, one of the most pressing things happening right now is through the Washington Voting Rights Act that passed in 2018, a case in Yakima County, where the representation, the Latinx community there is not getting representation in the county council. And so they filed a petition earlier this year under the Voting Rights Act here in Washington for a solution, including ranked choice voting as one of the solutions to that problem. They have passed their 180-day deadline, and so now there's a lawsuit that's been filed to push that forward. But the solution they're looking at is ranked choice voting, which is very exciting. We're hoping to see that materialize there in that county. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
That's great, Cindy. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, they're just fabulous state groups. In fact, we just compiled a map for this report, and I think it was state groups exist in 32 states and the District of Columbia, which is pretty impressive. And legislation is pending in a number of states. And then these voting rights cases that Cindy discussed are very important and have often been a conduit for more discussion about the remedy that ranked choice voting offers. Why don't, Kathy, if you want to hop on and talk about the experience from DC?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the shout out about the league. We're about to launch a poster contest for Get Out the Vote efforts for students all over. And we're going to use ranked choice voting to select the winners. There'll be 3 prizes. So it's just, you know, a little fun educational piece for our members to better understand RCV. And we're always looking for those little ways to do that. A couple of years ago, we did a beer tasting party that was fantastically successful. That was in conjunction with Fair Vote here, and that was really, really terrific. We look forward to the day when we can do that again.
That's great. Well, I suspect there are going to be a lot of people. Now we've got new great council members in DC who are, thanks to Michelle and others, who are raring to go on reform. So
yeah. And I think there are some groups clearly looking to put ranked choice voting in place, at least for our primaries.
Yes.
And maybe, you know, see if we can do a couple of wards or something, you know, a small bite that we can do successfully, I think would be a good way to start, because our Board of Election will need to work hard on their educational piece to make that happen.
Yes. Fortunately, I think it is true that there's a big base of support in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. So part of it is consolidating all those, you know, supporting one another in that work.
Exactly.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
Pam, did your
Yeah,
hand?
thank you.
Yeah,
Come in?
here I am. Yes, I actually want to go back to I think it was Michelle's talking about, was it Utah, where the Republicans basically initiated ranked choice voting? Given that ranked choice voting was passed during a Democratic legislator, and I think it actually went as a referendum to the public. I can't remember. But I know that in theory, it's not partisan, but I can understand why here in Maine, it really created a groundswell and was a really unpopular governor, or at least 70% of us, was elected with 35% of the vote. The second person in line was an independent who lost by a percentage, and the Democrat, interestingly enough, was way down in the 20%. So it was very controversial, but I know that was motivated by let's never have that happen again. So on some level, I have to say, while I believe in it, I think it was politically motivated. So I'm curious as to where you've seen it initiated in states that are more Republican. What would be their motivation to take the leadership on it?
Yeah, from my, and just excitingly, you can read about this in the RCV report, which is going to be coming out soon, that you can find on our website. And we do profile some of the recent Republican uses of it. As I think Courtney mentioned, it's been used by Republicans Virginia very successfully with very little fanfare. The Indiana Republican Party used it recently for their internal party elections. A number of other state parties, Republican state parties in states have been considering using it and embracing it. And in Utah, the support for it was almost unanimous, which is somewhat unheard of. So the interest, I would say, is really expanding. Of course, it is sometimes quite contextual, like it really makes sense in in Maine, because 9 of the last 10 gubernatorial elections were won with under 50%. But other places like Alaska can enjoy strong Republican support, and in Massachusetts, that supports a number of maybe more moderate Republicans, their support from Bill Weld, and a lot of people from across the partisan spectrum. So I think it's important to keep telling these stories so that a lot of people can feel like it's a reform that works for them, that solves the basic problem of split votes, which of course can happen in the 2016 GOP presidential primary just as easily as it can happen in the 2020 Democratic primary. So I think, again, just continuing to tell those stories and raise up successful examples of its use is really going to be core to its success. I know Michelle has to hop off, and I wanted to give her a chance to say a final few words.
Yeah, and I appreciate Pam's question on that, and I think it is, as Cynthia shared, the kind of context of seeing where it's used and how people are looking at it in different contexts. And I think it is easy to look at things in a partisan lens, but I know, especially when we're talking about primaries in certain locations that are looking at it, it is really focused on how does this meet a need for a particular group? So, Democratic primaries or Republican primaries, and really the impetus is those groups looking at it and seeing that they want to have a change, whether it's Republicans in Utah or other states that have been looking at that. And then they see the larger benefit to bringing it to larger groups. In addition, here in Montgomery County, where we've been looking at it, it's not something that's about, it's not partisan in the reason why we're looking at it. It really is about that equal representation. And I think that's an important place to frame it, if that is the question that comes up when you're talking to different people about it. We are kind of in a hyper political world right now, but I think that there's ways to kind of bring that down to let's just talk about where we have common goals and what we want to see in democracy, and start from that place. And then I just want to, I think from Sophia's question about women's political participation, I know that there's another report from Represent Women about funding for women candidates, and particularly focused on PACs. But I think that there's some great information in talking about just how women have a great opportunity to fund the candidates in election and to fund more women running for office, not only in open seats, but also in competitive seats. So making sure that they have equal funding to really run competitive races. And that's one way that we can participate, by using our dollars effectively. And then the second piece is really, the more work we can do to bring women into the political process, understanding different parts, being part of campaigns, leading campaigns. There is a stronger movement to make sure that we have campaign staff that are more women-led or led by people of color. And I think that's a great movement that we need to continue, and really give those opportunities for people to really understand the process better. And organizations that are focused on that, not only bringing new candidates, but also bringing in the staff that can help, is a great tool. And so I encourage you, if you have an opportunity to work on a campaign, or if you know somebody that's really interested in campaigns, to take that opportunity to work, intern if they can, or find another way that they can get deeply involved in the campaign, because that's a great start. For me too, it was something I didn't, this isn't a career working on campaigns. It was something where, both from my sister running, but just being in a place where I was like, hey, I want to know more about that. I want to be part of this, and diving into it, and really kind of loving it, and really enjoying being in it now more than ever. And so I just want people to have more of that experience. And whether it's coming from a data side, we need more women who are working on data in campaigns. We need more women who are working on the field and running field. And we need more women who are running for office. And so I lift that up as other opportunities for us to really increase participation, along with us using our dollars in whatever amount we can to support candidates and to support great organizations that are helping to advance women's representation. And sorry, I can't stay for the whole conversation, but I do appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. And it's so good to see you even online, just to be with you in community. And I hope we can continue to move things along in local politics as well as national politics. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Kathy, do you have your hand up to speak again?
No, sorry. It just never got put down.
just learning the technology. Any other thoughts or questions? One thing we didn't say anything about yet, and I don't know whether Maura or Courtney, you wanted to just jump in and say a couple words about, is the use internationally, that one of the strengths, and perhaps you mentioned this earlier and I was distracted and didn't hear it, but is that we see data from other countries that are using it that's compelling around women's representation as well. Though there's a different political environment in those countries, that's been an interesting thing for us to do research on and understand the important role that different election systems play in advancing women's representation in places like New Zealand and Australia and in London and the UK and so forth. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Maura or Courtney?
I just add that I think it's Ireland, Malta, New Zealand, and Australia are the 4 main international countries using ranked choice voting, whether it's in a single winner or multi-winner districts. But of that, New Zealand is ranked 20th in the world for women's representation in the lower house, and Australia is ranked 49th, both of which are well above the United States, who I checked today. As of June, we ranked 83rd in the world for women's representation. So that is a huge gap that we could help to correct with the implementation of ranked choice voting. And even when we do it at the local and state levels, that does create a larger pipeline for women to actually gain electoral experience and then go on to run nationally as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Maura. And Maura, in fact, did a fun chart of the women who are now credited with being particularly good in their response to the COVID crisis. All were first elected to parliaments, not all of which had ranked choice voting, but have a proportional voting system that's akin to ranked choice voting. And those systems, as Maura just outlined, really help to normalize women's power at the local and the state level. So all of a sudden, there are a lot of women who seem perfectly qualified to be a prime minister and either be appointed to a position or elected to a position. And so I think it's very important to think about all the mechanisms that exist at every level that really are preparing women, giving women power and a voice where decisions are being made. Any other thoughts or questions, comments?
So I think something that I could chime in with right at the end of this conversation here is, I guess, what everybody could look forward to with the forthcoming ranked choice voting report. This report will be really a deep dive into everything that we've discussed quite briefly during this whole conversation, starting with the basics of what is ranked choice voting, how is it used, the differences between a multi-winner and a single winner race, the history of ranked choice voting in the United States, detailing the multi-winner use of ranked choice voting in the United States in the earlier 1900s down to the 1960s, and then the kind of the revival of the movement in starting in the early 2000s. You know, that movement starting really in the 90s, but then picking up momentum by the early 2000s with the implementation of ranked choice voting again in the California Bay Area cities, and then carrying on from there over the past 20 years now. And then taking this conversation forward, we will kind of, you know, the report digs deeper into kind of what the outcomes have looked like for candidates running in these races. We focus on the past decade, but do touch on earlier examples. I see Andy in the chat has been talking about the use of ranked choice voting initially in New York City in the 30s and how that helped to lead to the first woman council member being elected, and we do touch on that in this report. And then kind of carry on in a bit more detail as to just really grinding in why systems do matter to help women get elected in the United States and why we at Represent Women care about talking about systemic change in the United States. So the 5 points that we will really kind of drive in a bit deeper in this report are that ranked choice voting is helpful because it mitigates the risk of leading to a split vote. It incentivizes positive, and then the third point is issue-based campaigning. It will lead to a more cost-effective campaigning style for the candidates, but also a more cost-effective election cycle for the cities, so because they can save on having to run expensive runoffs. And then, of course, our biggest point is, since we care about having representative democracy, it will yield more representative outcomes where you can have more confidence that the candidates elected have majority support. And at Represent Women, as we care about having more women elected to office and recognize through the Gender Parity Index and through all of our other research that we are still quite shy of that goal, it is very exciting, very promising to have seen, as we do with this report, that in ranked choice cities, more women are being elected to office, more people of color are being elected to office. And then even though it's less obvious, since you really stare at the data and look at the regional comparisons, we grind a bit more carefully with California to kind of make this point. The outcomes are also stronger for women of color. And I think as we kind of move forward in the future, we at Represent Women will continue to dig into this research, dive a little bit deeper into the positive trends for turnout, and work on some additional really exciting works. Maura Riley and Cynthia are working on an academic piece that will kind of dig a little bit further into this whole history and what this really means for the United States as we consider where the momentum of this movement will go in the future. And then at the very end of the report, really do take the time to look at how you can get involved. Anna, who helped to kind of organize this call from the outreach team this summer, spent a lot of time helping us to generate a new take action list for how to get involved in ranked choice voting, whether it's at the national movement with the bills that are taking place through the Fair Representation Act, the Ranked Choice Voting Act, and I believe that's the Voter Choice Act in the Senate, and then how then for a little bit further down in the state and local level, you can get involved in a campaign that might be in your own backyard. And I think whether that's getting involved in these political campaigns for these bills and legislation, or introducing ranked choice voting to your own friends and family with the Ranked app and with all the other great tools that we have for you to kind of use and start sharing in your own community, we really invite you to kind of start these conversations and continue to kind of dig into that from there.
Yes, here to all of that.
Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll be having, I believe, 4 or 3 more webinars over the rest of this summer. So we'll be sending more information out about that, and you can go ahead and register for them. But yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our panelists for sharing all your knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Look for us on social media.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. And thanks to those of you in the States working so hard for ranked choice voting.